Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about Production Point, which is a practical project management methodology that I have come up with for solo developers. To introduce this methodology, we're going to talk about a problem that went unsolved in the mathematical community for quite a while, actually. It has been solved now, but let's look at the problem. So it's called the multi-armed bandit problem. And in the problem, you're presented with some slot machines. In this example, we'll say we have 3 slot machines. And each machine has a different win rate. So we'll have 40% win rate, 50% win rate, and 60% win rate. Obviously, we want to put all of our money into the 60% win rate, right? But there's a couple problems. Number one, we don't actually know which win rate is associated with which slot machine. And number two, we only have 30 coins or 30 tokens in order to figure that out. So you might approach this problem by, say, assigning a certain amount of tokens to each machine in order to try and get a gauge for what its win rate is. So we've got 30 tokens. We might put 5 tokens into each machine, and then you try and put the rest of the tokens into the machine that had the highest outcome, the best outcome. However, because these win rates are relatively close to each other, it's possible that we could end up with like 2 wins and 3 losses on every machine, or 3 wins and 2 losses on every machine. And we still don't really have a good idea of which machine is actually the best one. So this is a difficult problem to solve. And it was actually solved by a gentleman with the last name of Gittins. So if you're curious as to the solution, you can look up the Gittins index. And what it does is it assigns a index value to each slot machine, and that value is calculated with some math that's complicated and outside the scope of this video. But you always pull the machine with the highest Gittins index. So that's the solution. But regardless of which solution you use, because there actually are some other approaches to this problem, they all break the problem down into 2 distinct phases. And these 2 phases are the explore and exploit phase. So I'm going to propose that we also break down the project management method that we use for making games into these 2 phases, the explore and exploit phase. So exploit has a pretty negative connotation in English, but just think of it as using the information that you've already gathered to produce a known good result. So something that's good. And we'll call these 2 phases the production phase and the prototyping phase. So phase 1 is prototyping and phase 2 is production. Now, if you're not making progress on your game, it can be because you're stuck in one of these 2 phases. So when you're stuck in the prototyping phase, that can look like over-planning, not getting feedback from players, prototyping forever, never committing to something. When you're stuck in production, it can look like no deadlines, infinite polish, no plan. Even worse, however, is that the line between these 2 phases can become blurred, and you can end up in a superposition between the 2 phases. It can feel really awful. You have multiple symptoms from both phases, and it can feel like you're never going to actually finish your project. So as an attempt to remedy this problem, where we can be stuck in either of the phases or in the superposition, I'm going to attempt to draw a clear line between the 2 phases. And this line, we will discuss the differences between each phase in particular areas. So we'll start with focus. During the prototyping phase, you should be focused on systems and mechanics. So that could be any logic that handles the interaction between entities in your games. So your inventory system, your items, your collisions. I have gravity here as an example. During the production phase, you're going to focus on content. So that's going to be making new levels, adding new enemies, new playable characters, potentially new items. It's going to build upon the existing systems and mechanics that you already have. Now, there will be some overlap, obviously. You have to make some content in order to prototype, and you may need to do some systems and mechanics stuff during production, although I would be very wary of that. So be very careful of that. What's important here is the focus. So how do we scope in these two different phases? Well, in prototyping, you're going to scope by doing. It's very difficult to plan during the prototyping phase because your systems and mechanics, you can never be quite sure how they're going to work out until you have them down in a tangible form. So we're going to scope by doing. Prove you can do it. For the production phase, we're going to scope by planning. That's because it can be really easy to just add content forever or add polish forever. So we're going to need to give ourselves some deadlines, and we're going to need to have a plan and exactly what we want to do. Also, it's much easier to plan for your content because if you've already made one level, you have a pretty good idea of how long it's going to take to make another level. Let's look at mentality now. During prototyping, you'll want to have a playful mentality. Remember, this is the explore phase. So you're going to explore a lot of ideas. You won't want to take anything too seriously and just have a lot of fun. See what you can come up with, see what you can make, and make a lot of different things too. Don't focus on one particular thing. During production, you're going to have a work mentality. So deadlines, good deadlines, and habits are going to be your friend. Obviously, you still want to enjoy this, but it's going to be put your headphones on, listen to some music, and put in the hours. Now we'll talk about feedback during the phases. When you're getting feedback during prototyping, you're going to be getting feedback constantly. You're going to be asking the big questions, which is, are these mechanics working together? Do the players enjoy these mechanics? Are they having fun with this game? How long are they playing? I actually recommend using video during prototyping as well, because you can gauge players' reactions in the video, either through the sound of the tone of their voice or their facial expressions. So that's really important. So it's big questions. You're also not going to need a ton of people. If you have 5 to 10 people in your target audience, that should give you a pretty good idea of the feedback that you need and whether or not this game is going to work or not. Now, during production, you're not actually going to get a lot of feedback for most of production. You will get some feedback here and there. You want to check up on stuff, but most of your feedback is going to be near the end when you're doing your alpha or your beta, and you're going to want to get a large pool of players, right? Hundreds of players ideally, in order to find as many bugs as possible and look for quality of life issues. How can I clean up the game and polish it so that it feels good to the majority of players? If you've done your job right, your game's already going to be good. So you're not going to be trying to figure out whether your game's good at this point. And you can also just use written feedback for this. Okay, now we're going to discuss 2 graphs. And these 2 graphs are also very important to keep in mind. So during prototyping, we're going to be focusing on systems and mechanics, right? Well, the work required to add new systems and mechanics follows an exponential curve, meaning the more systems and mechanics you add to the game, the more work is required to add new systems and mechanics. This is part of why we don't plan during this phase, why we scope our game by doing it. During production, we're going to be adding content, which is generally going to follow a linear curve. Adding one more level isn't going to take any more work than adding the last level did, for the most part. So we can plan for it. Again, this is why we can plan for it. And we want to combine these graphs in a way that optimizes for progress, and that's where we get the production point. So the production point takes the prototyping phase and sticks it at the start of this graph, and then we have a point at which we transition to production, and that's the production point. And this line here is this clear dividing line that we're attempting to draw between these two phases. And the more clear that line is, the better we will be able to optimize for progress here, because we don't want to get stuck anywhere along the way. So here are some frequently asked questions I've gotten when I've shown this idea to people. What if your game requires a lot of content to prototype? Something like Stardew Valley, for example. I would say that your prototyping and your production phases are going to have different lengths, especially depending on your genre. If you're making a platformer, your prototyping phase is going to be shorter while the production phase is going to be longer. You're going to need to make a lot of levels for that platformer. However, I will say that, games that do have a longer prototyping phase that require more content during the prototyping phase, you might be surprised about how much content you can get away with, like how little content you can get away with making. But do keep in mind that different genres will require different balances here. What about stuff like RPG Maker? Well, RPG Maker is wonderful, honestly. If you're making an RPG and you can use an engine like RPG Maker that will handle most of the systems and mechanics for your game, then you can really shorten down that prototyping phase and jump right into production. However, you will still probably want to prototype parts of your game. In particular, you'd probably want to prototype your story. Could be a Google Doc with several different stories. You make different variations, you get feedback on those stories, pick one that's engaging for your audience and run with that. Then you can move to production. So how do you know when to switch to production? Well, it's not an easy answer, but I will have some more ideas on this later. The main point is that you're looking for a prototype that is engaging, people enjoy doing it, and it's already completed. So the systems and mechanics are already finished, and your players just want more content. They're like, I already like this thing you made. Just give me more of it, more content. So that's how you know when to switch to production. What about market research? Market research is very important if you want to make money on your game, and it should be done during the prototyping phase. You'll want to check trends, see what players are engaging with right now, check reviews on games that follow those trends, and see if you can fill a need for the players. If they really love this game, but there's a common issue in the reviews, maybe you can make a game similar to that and address that issue. When you switch to production, do you rewrite your systems? So this is a good question. When you're switching to production, you should be focused on content, which means you don't want to be doing any systems or mechanics code. So if you pick a prototype that you made and it's working really well, but there's some bugs in it because you just wrote throwaway code for your mechanics and systems, then you're going to need to refactor or rewrite that code in order to get that prototype ready for production in order to then switch to production. So if you need to rewrite your systems and mechanics code, that's going to happen at the end of the prototyping phase. Which phase is game feel in? So when you're adding, like game feel to your game to make it feel good to play, that depends. It depends on the type of feel you're adding. If your game has to have a blood splatter system that has is intelligent enough to make blood splatter on the walls or the floor or whatever, right? That's a system, so you would add that in prototyping. However, the graphic for that blood, whatever you use, should probably be filler, because that would fall under content. So that type of feel, like how good it looks, right, can affect game feel. That would come into production. So it depends. Just remember the general rule that you want to focus on systems and mechanics during prototyping and content during production. So that's it. I have experienced both extremes in this, the extreme of getting stuck, feeling like I'm in that superposition, and also the extreme of just having a project flow quite nicely and be constantly making progress with a reasonable amount of effort, but I'm always making progress. I never feel stuck, and I feel like I'm progressing towards an end. And the contrast there for me has been between Demon Lock, which has been really hard. I felt like I haven't had a clear line between these two phases, and Tic Tac Tanks, which is now coming. We're going to be releasing closed beta here soon, and I have used this project management method for Tic Tac Tanks, but I haven't used it well in Demon Lock. I'm going to be taking a break from Demon Lock for now, and I'm going to finish up Tic Tac Tanks and explore this idea some more. I'd like to write a book about this because I think that this will really help solo developers if they're able to have clear steps and a really good plan and, I guess, framework for how they can manage their project. I really think that will help them finish. And that's my goal, is to help people to finish their games. So that would be the goal of the book. So let me know if you guys have any questions about this, if you're interested in this, if you'd like to see a book on this. I also wrote a Substack post that talks about all of this, and I'll put the link to that Substack post in the description and in the comments below. So check those out. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this was helpful and you learned something, and I will talk to you all later.